why can't we just like close the tax loopholes? Because I mean, I assume, correct me if I'm wrong, like tax justice is like you want everyone to have the rules applied equally to them, like the tax laws, you want that apply equally to everyone. So like, why can't we, or haven't we, like just, why are tax havens even a thing? Like,
yeah. So I mean, tax havens go hand in hand with kind of liberalization of the economy. You know, they really start popping up in the 1970s, the 1980s, as a way of getting around the controls that big countries like the US and the UK had in place on moving money. You know, a lot of people forget that in the 70s, in the 60s, there were real limits on being able to move money in and out of major countries. And so tax havens were a part of a sort of shadow system to move money around and keep it hidden from the authorities. So that's where that's where they come from. It's about escaping rules, escaping scrutiny, escaping tax as well. But your question was, why haven't we shut them down?
Yeah.
And there's kind of two parts to that. The first one is there actually has been quite a lot of progress in the last 10 years of bringing in more tax transparency, bringing in better rules, closing loopholes, putting more money into enforcement. So, you know, I think it's really important to recognize we have made some progress, but we still have tax havens. And that's partly because there are very rich, very powerful people and companies that use them, that benefit from them, that are able to hide their identity. And the Paradise Papers out this week Pandora Papers. I get there are so many different alliterative papers. The Pandora Papers out this week are a really good sneak peek behind the curtain at what's going on in these tax havens. And we've had, you know, reports of really senior political figures, business figures using tax havens to hide their money and hide their identity. And money equals power. And power is, you know, there's a lot of political pressure not to close these places.
So it's like, it really is that simple. It's just corruption, basically, or not even corruption, but like people in positions of power saying, well, that would be a bad thing for us if we had to like have everything in the UK. You know, we'd like keeping some money offshore. So just, you know, Boris, Keir, can you not touch the tax havens?
So those conversations probably don't happen quite as explicit, although who knows, you know, I'm not necessarily in the room. You know, there's also a challenge that you need to try and get coordinated global action to shut these places down. And again, that's where we've seen some progress really since the financial crisis, where countries have come together, have brought in new measures, have closed down some of the loopholes, have made this stuff harder. And so we've seen some progress. I mean, I think one of the other really important things to think about with tax havens is, you know, the actual real activity, the strategizing, the thinking, it doesn't happen in these little tax havens. It happens in places like London and New York. And tax havens are all about pretense. They're about pretending that activity or money exists in a mailbox in the British Virgin Islands, or the decisions of a hedge fund are made in the Cayman Islands. That's rubbish. That is not how it works in practice. What happens is people in very, very expensive boardroom suites in London and New York and Frankfurt and Paris, they're the ones making the decisions. And the tax haven network allows this fiction, this made up idea that there's billions and billions and billions and billions of pounds of investment in these tiny little places. And it's all on paper. And the reality is actually that activity is happening in these big financial centers, which is another reason why they don't get shut down. You know, they're very useful for people in countries that are more powerful.
Yeah. And I guess, well, so now bringing us nicely to the Pandora Papers, it's really, I don't think it's like surprising to anyone. And I feel like it's just like, well, yeah, obviously is the reaction to, like, obviously there's some scandals and stuff, but I feel like most people's reaction is, well, yeah, obviously they're doing this. The rich and powerful have the ability to hide their money offshore. So why wouldn't they? Like for example, I don't think anyone would be stunned that Tony Blair saved £312,000, or £312,000, on the because he had his nice little Blair company, or Blair LLC, or whatever you called it, offshore. And it's such I think the thing that like stuns me every time I go into this subject is just like how routine that offshoring of money is to like some big corporations. It's just like, and especially like the big four accounting firms that sort of enable this. They write the tax laws and then sell the ability to get around it to their customers. But so yeah, the Pandora Papers. Like, do you want to explain like what it is and if you think it's different to the Panama or Paradise Papers?
Yeah, so the Pandora Papers is a massive leak of millions and millions of documents. And the documents are from organizations, company service providers, offshore providers. These are companies based in these offshore havens that set up companies, set up bank accounts, set up trust structures, and help their rich clients move money around the world. I mean, really, they're glorified paper pushers. These companies where the leaks have come from, they're not where the really smart accountants and lawyers are based. They're people who do the sort of grunt bureaucracy, paper pushing work of setting up companies and moving money around, which technically is not that difficult. And so what's happened is a lot of data has been leaked from a number of different corporate service providers to a group called the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists, which is a group of journalists and newspapers based around the world who've then been sifting through this material for probably about the last year and coming together and creating stories. And so there's an interesting journalism story here that these massive leaks of data has really led to sort of global collaboration between journalists, which is a fairly new thing. So what we're and then they all agree, okay, we're going to launch on this day and we're going to put this story out and then this story out and then this story out and build some momentum. And so that's what we've been seeing. And, the last week we've had stories about, you've already mentioned the Blairs. The King of Jordan is found to have owned, I think, something like $100 million of property through offshore companies. The Czech Prime Minister has a nice chateau in the south of France, again, owned through offshore companies. As usual in these things, there are quite a lot of figures from Russia, from the ex-Soviet countries, again, also moving money around. A lot of this is about hiding assets as opposed to straightforward tax evasion or avoidance. There are some sort of corruption and money laundering stories in there as well. But I think what you're saying about this being routine is really important. If you operate at a certain level of wealth and power, using offshore complicated structures is absolutely par for the course. And it was quite interesting, some of the reaction around the Blair story, where they managed to save £300,000 in stamp duty when they bought a property, is, this is just how it's done. This is just business. There are sort of people who are accountant experts, tax lawyers, who are like, why is everyone making a fuss? This is just normal business practice. Yeah. And that's why I think people should get angry, is that there's one rule for the rich and powerful and a different rule for the rest of us. Yeah,
I guess that's the thing that always gets me about this, is like when you get to a certain level of wealth, like tax becomes optional. It's not an obligation anymore. It's like, well, you can get around it, so why wouldn't you?
And I think what has changed is it is harder to do the really dirty tax evasion, absolutely hiding your assets from the tax authorities. That's harder. And actually, one of the things that's different with these stories compared to previous leaks is there are fewer examples of really rich people actually hiding stuff from the tax authorities and illegally not paying the tax that they owe. A lot of the stories that are coming out of this are much more about people hiding their identity through offshore companies and their ownership of property and hiding that, as opposed to, absolute criminality. And so I think that's something that we've seen change. Since the financial crisis in 2008, tax authorities have access to much more information than they used to. And so it is harder to evade scrutiny from the tax authorities. I mean, if you're really rich, there are lots of legal ways in which you can lower your tax bill. And that's a whole different problem.
Yeah, something, NFTs. So what you're talking about there is like that there's it's less blatantly illegal activity happening now, and it's sort of more people finding ways to just exploit loopholes and rules in a legal but perhaps not moral fashion.
I think that's true. I think it's both about reducing tax bill and secrecy. So a lot of the big political stories in here are about rich, powerful politicians owning property and not declaring it and being angry that it's come out that they own this property. And that's a problem. I mean, another problem, for example, with the Blairs, what they did was almost certainly legal, and it highlights a flaw in the tax system. It highlights a loophole that if you buy a commercial property and you buy it through a company that owns the property, you don't pay stamp duty, whereas if you buy the property itself, you do. And so I think what we need to do as campaigners, I think it's really important to highlight we have had successes. We have seen the ability of really rich people to evade tax in a totally illegal way. That has become harder. And that has partly become harder because of campaigners, because of people power, because of anger. So things can change. And yet, and this is, this is a campaigner, this is the balance, I think is really important. Change is possible. We have seen change, but there's so much more that needs to happen. We have a tax system that is set up in the UK and around the world that means if you're really rich, you can find endless ways of reducing your tax bill.
Yeah, and I guess that's what frustrates people as well. Like they see that they have to just pay. They don't have the the high paid accountants and whatnot. So what do you think the biggest story out of this thus far is? Like, what's the one that's causing the most waves, or is perhaps the one that you think is the most important or significant?
So I think, in the UK context, we've obviously got the story of the Blairs. We've also got some stories of a number of donors to the Conservative Party cropping up in these stories, involved in various business deals. There's one allegation that one of these donors was involved in a business deal which subsequently was seen to be corrupt. And so that's in some ways shocking, in some ways it's not. I suspect some of the bigger impact is going to be in other countries. So for example, we have an election coming up in the Czech Republic, and the Prime Minister who's running for power again was revealed to own this chateau in the south of France. You also have the King of Jordan with his, I think it's $100 million of property owned offshore. Jordan is a pretty authoritarian country, and so it'll be interesting to see how much this filters through. I mean, I think the real challenge that the journalists have, and frankly we have as campaigners, is how do you get beyond people's sort of shrug of indifference? People, as you were saying, see these and are like, well, this isn't new. I'm not surprised. Nothing ever changes. This is just the way the world is. And I think pushing beyond that and saying, maybe it's the world is now, but we can change it.
Thanks for making it all the way to the end of the video. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and leave a comment for us in the comments below. Let me know what you thought and if you'd like to see more of this from the show. Thank you, and we'll see you again next time.